For centuries, whispers circled the walls of Kensington Palace, rumors of a hidden vault sealed by royal decree, untouched by time or truth. But now, everything has changed. Princess Catherine has done the unthinkable. What she discovered inside wasn't just shocking, it threatens to unravel generations of royal secrecy. The question is no longer what's hidden, but why it was hidden at all. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The legend of the vault has lived in the shadows of the palace for generations, passed quietly between footmen, archivists, and aging courtiers who spoke of it only in lowered voices. Buried deep within the oldest foundations of Kensington, it was said to contain more than relics. It held truths too volatile for public memory. Some claimed it safeguarded ancient treaties drafted in desperation. Others whispered of private letters, confessions written in trembling ink by monarchs who ruled the world, yet could not rule their own fates. The most chilling rumor suggested that even senior royals were deliberately kept ignorant, that knowledge of its contents was restricted to a select few bound by an oath heavier than the crown itself. For decades, the vault became a forbidden myth acknowledged by none, denied by all. Attempts to locate it were quietly redirected. Inquiries were stalled by bureaucratic fog. A renovation project in the late 20th century reportedly came dangerously close to its rumored entrance, only to be restructured overnight. Workers were reassigned. Blueprints vanished. The message was unmistakable. Some doors were never meant to open. And yet, circumstances shifted. Catherine, now firmly rooted within the royal hierarchy, found herself granted a level of access few outsiders ever achieve, whether through authority bestowed upon her role or through a convergence of timing and trust. She reached a threshold no one expected her to cross. Advisors cautioned patience. Senior figures hinted that certain traditions survive for a reason. There were murmurs, subtle, persistent, that disturbing the past could destabilize the present. But hesitation has never defined her public image. Resolve has. When she moved forward, it was not an act of rebellion, but of necessity. Sources suggest that what prompted her decision was not idle curiosity, but a pattern fragments of correspondence, inconsistencies in archived records, subtle omissions in official narratives. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became that the vault was not simply a chamber of history. It was a safeguard against revelation. What lay inside, insiders now hint, was not limited to dusty artifacts or ceremonial heirlooms. The contents were described as intimate, personal, documents that blur the line between state duty and private turmoil, evidence of sacrifices made in silence. Choices that shaped the monarchy's survival while fracturing the lives behind palace gates. And if true, the implications stretch far beyond heritage, they strike at identity. Because if the foundation of a modern monarchy rests upon carefully guarded secrets, then exposing them is not just an act of discovery. It is an act of transformation. The vault was sealed to protect something, or someone. And by opening it, Catherine may have altered the delicate balance between legacy and truth, a balance the royal family has spent centuries trying to preserve. But what drove Catherine to cross a line no royal had dared approach, and what exactly did she expect to find? It wasn't curiosity, it was something deeper, something urgent. Insiders say Catherine had been acting differently for weeks before the vault was opened. Quiet, observant, calculated. Then, without warning, she made a decision that would shock even the most seasoned palace insiders. This wasn't protocol, it was defiance. And once the door opened, there was no turning back. What those closest to her began to notice was not recklessness, but restraint stretched to its limit. For months, perhaps longer, Catherine had carried the weight of questions she could not publicly ask. Duty demanded composure. Tradition demanded silence. Yet beneath the polished exterior was a rising tension, an awareness that something within the royal narrative did not align. Dates that didn't match, correspondence that felt incomplete, carefully worded explanations that revealed more in what they avoided than in what they confirmed. She had been raised to respect the institution. Now she found herself quietly interrogating it. There were warnings, subtle but unmistakable. Senior officials advised patience when she requested access to certain archived materials. Meetings were postponed. Requests were redirected. A phrase echoed more than once. Some histories are best left undisturbed. It was not a command, but it carried the weight of one, and still, she persisted not publicly, not dramatically, but with a calm intensity that unsettled those accustomed to obedience. Late-night discussions replaced ceremonial appearances. Private briefings were scheduled off the official calendar. Trusted aides were asked questions that seemed harmless in isolation, but together formed a pattern pointing toward one forbidden place. Those behavioral shifts did not go unnoticed. Courtiers whispered that she was digging too deeply, that her curiosity was becoming dangerous. But this was no idle fascination with palace lore. It was personal. Sources suggest that fragments of family history stories half-told, letters referenced but never shown, had begun to surface in ways that felt inti, end notion, as if someone somewhere in the past had anticipated this moment. The possibility that the vault contained answers tied not only to the monarchy's survival, but to her own family's legacy, pressed against her conscience. And with that pressure came fear, because seeking truth inside a monarchy is not a neutral act. It is disruptive. Catherine understood that opening the vault would not simply reveal forgotten documents. It could expose decisions that shaped the present in ways no one was prepared to confront. It could challenge loyalties. It could fracture trust. It could alter how the public perceives a dynasty built on continuity and control. The cost would not be hers alone to bear. Her husband, her children, the crown itself, all could be drawn into the fallout of whatever lay hidden behind that sealed door. And yet, the greater risk in her mind may have been ignorance. To lead without knowing, to defend traditions without understanding their origins. The internal conflict became a silent battle between preserving harmony and confronting reality, between protecting the monarchy's image and protecting its future. In the end, hesitation gave way to resolve. Not because she was certain of what she would find, but because she was no longer willing to accept carefully constructed gaps as answers. And when the vault door finally creaked open, what greeted her was far more unsettling than anyone could have imagined. Dust, silence, and a darkness that felt deliberate. As Catherine stepped inside the hidden vault, the air itself seemed heavy with secrets long buried. What she saw first wasn't gold or jewels. It was something far more chilling, something that suggested this vault wasn't meant to preserve history, but to conceal it. And in that moment, Catherine realized this was bigger than anyone had warned her. The space did not greet her with grandeur. There no glittering crowns resting beneath velvet cloth, no ceremonial swords polished for admiration. Instead, the chamber felt restrained, almost austere, as if its purpose had always been containment rather than celebration. The stone walls carried the weight of decades, perhaps centuries, of silence. Shelves lined the perimeter in careful order, yet nothing about them invited pride. They held records, boxes, files bound in fading leather. It was an archive stripped of romance, devoted not to glory but to guarded memory. And that absence of spectacle, of splendor, was the first warning. This was not a treasury, it was a vault of restraint, a place designed to keep certain narratives from ever stepping into daylight. Catherine moved further inside, her composure steady but her thoughts racing. The shelves bore coded markings instead of descriptive labels. Dates were abbreviated, names reduced to initials. Entire decades condensed into discrete containers that revealed nothing from the outside. Some boxes were sealed with wax long hardened and cracked, others bound with ribbon that had faded but remained intact, untouched by curious hands. It felt preserved in time, as though the moment it had been closed, the world above had continued forward, while this chamber remained frozen waiting. There was an order to it all, but not the kind meant for historians. This system was protective, selective. It suggested that whoever curated these contents understood their power. Catherine sensed it immediately. This was not simply documentation. It was strategy. Memory curated to defend the monarchy from itself. Her initial shock gave way to something more unsettling: recognition. Certain family names, even in abbreviated form, were impossible to ignore. References to events that had long been publicly resolved appeared again here, filed under different classifications. The implication was clear. The official story may have been only part of the truth, and if that was so, What else had been carefully rewritten? Then her gaze settled on a single object that stood apart from the others. A locked case, darker than the surrounding boxes, positioned not at the back of a shelf, but at eye level, as if intentionally placed to confront whoever dared enter. It bore no date, no initials, only a subtle crest embossed into its surface, an older version of the royal insignia, one that predated the current reign. The symbolism was impossible to dismiss. This was legacy within legacy. For a moment, hesitation returned, not because she lacked courage, but because she understood the gravity of crossing this threshold. Whatever lay inside that case had been deliberately separated from the rest, protected, perhaps even feared. The weight of generations seemed to press inward, urging caution, but alongside that pressure was a rising certainty. The monarchy she was sworn to serve could not be safeguarded by ignorance. Her fingers moved toward the nearest sealed box instead, as if testing the waters before confronting the centerpiece. The wax seal resisted at first, then yielded, a small, almost insignificant sound, but in the silence of that chamber, it felt seismic. Inside were documents layered carefully, edges yellowed yet preserved with meticulous care, handwritten notes rested atop typed memoranda, corrections scrawled in margins, passages underlined, as if they carried consequences that once demanded urgent attention. And with each layer she uncovered, the atmosphere shifted not physically, but emotionally. The vault no longer felt like a relic of the past. It felt active, alive with implications, because what these sealed items contained was not just history, it was motive. But it wasn't the atmosphere that shook Catherine to her core, it was what she found when she began to open the first box. At first, they looked like ordinary documents, aged paper, handwritten notes, faded seals. But as Catherine read line after line, her expression reportedly changed. What she was holding wasn't history, it was evidence. Evidence of something the monarchy had spent decades hiding. And the deeper she went, the more impossible it became to ignore. This vault wasn't protecting legacy, it was protecting a secret. The first letters appeared harmless, written in the careful, measured tone of royal correspondence, formal greetings, diplomatic phrasing, but beneath the polished language were undercurrents of urgency, phrases crossed out, sentences rewritten in a different hand, margins filled with private remarks, never meant for public archives. These were not ceremonial exchanges preserved for posterity. They were confidential communications between senior royals, spanning generations, discussing matters that never reached official records, decisions made quietly, alliances forged discreetly, prizes managed behind closed doors, while the world was offered reassurance. As Catherine continued, a pattern emerged, one that clashed sharply with the monarchy's carefully maintained narrative. Events long portrayed as inevitable or harmonious were revealed to have been fiercely contested. Public reconciliations masked bitter divisions. Strategic marriages described as fairy tales concealed negotiations, bordering on desperation. Even abdications and withdrawals from royal duties, once framed as personal choices, were dissected in these letters as calculated moves to shield the institution from greater fallout. The truth was not romantic, it was strategic, ruthless at times. And then came the contradictions that made her pause. Names of individuals who had vanished from official accounts resurfaced in these pages, advisors dismissed without explanation, distant relatives quietly relocated, voices that once challenged the crown and were subsequently erased from its story. Entire chapters of royal history had been condensed, rewritten, or omitted altogether. Not to simplify, but to protect reputations, protect stability, protect the illusion of continuity at any cost. The emotional weight of that realization was staggering. Catherine understood tradition, she respected discretion. But this was something else. This was a deliberate shaping of memory itself. The monarchy she had pledged to uphold was not merely guided by heritage, it was curated by a mission. And as each document unfolded, the distance between public image and private reality widened. One revelation in particular refused to fade into abstraction. A series of correspondences between a former monarch and a senior advisor referenced a containment strategy during a period of intense public scrutiny decades ago. Official history had described that era as turbulent but resolved, Yet these letters suggested something far more volatile, an internal scandal suppressed through calculated narrative control. Statements were drafted, redrafted, and strategically leaked. Loyal figures were elevated to divert attention. Others were sacrificed reputationally to preserve the crown's authority. What made it devastating was not simply the manipulation, it was the implication that echoes of that same strategy could still exist. The language used then mirrored phrases still heard today. The tactics felt familiar. And if such methods were once deployed to shield the monarchy, who was to say they had ever truly stopped? Catherine's position made the danger unmistakable. She was no distant observer, she was central to the present monarchy's future. If the institution had previously rewritten truth to survive, what would prevent it from doing so again? And what would that mean for her, family, for her children, if stability ever demanded another sacrifice? The realization settled heavily. Knowledge itself was perilous. To expose these documents would risk destabilizing public trust. To conceal them would make her complicit in a legacy of silence. She now carried awareness that could fracture alliances, challenge authority, and ignite questions the palace was unprepared to answer. The vault had not simply revealed secrets, it had handed her a choice, but the documents were only the beginning, because buried deeper in the vault was something far more disturbing. Hidden beneath layers of files and forgotten records was an object that didn't belong. It wasn't labeled. It wasn't catalogued. And according to insiders, it carried an energy that made even seasoned staff uneasy. When Catherine uncovered it, the atmosphere reportedly shifted, because this wasn't just a relic, it was a piece of a story that had been deliberately buried. It had been concealed beneath a stack of archival boxes, almost as if someone had tried to hide it in plain sight. Unlike the orderly files surrounding it, this object seemed displaced, too personal to be institutional, too significant to be accidental. It was a slim, dark case, worn at the edges, bearing an insignia no longer used by the modern monarchy. The crest etched into its surface belonged to a branch of the family tree that official biographies rarely lingered on, a lineage referenced briefly, then quietly redited in public accounts. Catherine did not reach for it immediately. There was a pause, subtle but telling. She had already uncovered contradictions in ink and paper, but this felt different. Documents could be debated, letters could be contextualized. An artifact, however, carried weight without explanation. It existed, it endured, and this one had survived decades of silence without ever being recorded in the official inventory. That alone raised a question no one in the palace had answered. Who placed it here, and why was it never meant to be found? When she finally lifted it, the significance became harder to ignore. Inside rested a collection of items that did not align with the monarchy's polished narrative personal correspondence. A signet ring bearing a modified crest, and a photograph of a royal figure whose name had long faded from ceremonial speeches. That figure had once stood close to the line of succession, then vanished from prominence after a so-called private decision reshaped the family's future. Publicly, it had been described as a graceful departure. Privately, the contents of this case suggested something far more complicated. The ring in particular seemed symbolic. It was not an heirloom passed down. It was distinct, crafted differently, marked with a subtle alteration in the royal emblem, as though it represented an alternative claim or allegiance. Its presence implied power interrupted, authority redirected, and if the photograph and letters were to be believed, the departure of that forgotten royal had not been voluntary at all. It had been negotiated, pressured, perhaps even orchestrated to prevent a fracture within the crown. The implications were staggering. If a lineage had been deliberately obscured to preserve stability, then the monarchy's carefully curated succession was not merely tradition, it was strategy. Catherine could feel the emotional undercurrent running through the discovery. This was not gossip preserved for scandal. It was evidence of sacrifice, of betrayal masked as duty, of a branch of the family pruned from public memory so the tree could appear unbroken. And yet, the deeper she examined the contents, the more questions surfaced. Why preserve these items at all, if the goal was total erasure? Why hide them instead of destroying them? The act of concealment suggested hesitation, perhaps even regret. It was as though someone within the institution wanted the truth to survive, just not in their lifetime. The object did not provide clear answers. Instead, it expanded the mystery. It hinted at hidden lineage, at decisions that shaped the present monarchy in ways the public never imagined. And as Catherine stood there, holding proof that history had been carefully edited, one realization began to take shape: secrets this significant are rarely buried by only one set of hands. And just as Catherine began to piece together the truth, she realized she might not have been the first to uncover it. Scratches, missing pages, altered records. As Catherine examined the vault more closely, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a place of storage. It was a place of manipulation. Someone had been here before. Someone who didn't want the full truth to survive. And suddenly, the question wasn't just what had been hidden, but who had been hiding it, and why. The signs were subtle at first: a torn corner where a signature should have been, ink that shifted tone mid-sentence, as if a paragraph had been inserted years later, entire pages carefully removed from bound files, leaving behind only faint impressions of what once filled the space. These were not the marks of time or decay. They were deliberate, precise, executed by hands that understood exactly which fragments of truth posed the greatest risk. As Catherine cross-referenced documents within the vault, inconsistencies multiplied. A letter referenced an attached report that no longer existed. A memorandum alluded to a meeting whose minutes had vanished. Dates aligned too neatly with public announcements, as though internal events had been rearranged to match a preferred storyline. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became. This history had been curated. Not impulsively, but systematically, across decades. What unsettled her most was the layering of concealment. Early records showed minor redactions, names obscured, sensitive phrases struck through. Later files revealed more aggressive alterations, paragraphs rewritten entirely, marginal notes replaced with polished summaries. It suggested a pattern of evolving cover-ups, each generation refining the work of the last. Secrets were not merely buried, they were edited, reshaped, and repackaged to survive scrutiny. And that meant access. Someone within the palace structure had returned to this vault repeatedly, not to preserve, but to control. The realization tightened around her thoughts. This was not the act of an outsider or a rogue archivist. It required authority, clearance, confidence that no one would question the revisions, which raised a far more dangerous possibility. How high did the knowledge of these alterations reach? Catherine understood the delicate machinery of the monarchy. Power here was rarely loud. It was procedural. Decisions were made in committees, in private briefings, in conversations that left no official trace. If the vault had been maintained as a living instrument of narrative control, then it was not just protecting the institution, it was protecting individuals, influential figures whose reputations depended on carefully maintained illusions, people who might still occupy positions of trust. Her discovery shifted from historical curiosity to immediate threat. Because uncovering a secret is one thing, exposing the architects of that secrecy is another entirely. If the vault contained evidence of orchestrated suppression, then revealing it could ignite consequences far beyond embarrassment. It could fracture alliances within the palace walls. It could destabilize public confidence. It could call into question decisions that continue to shape the monarchy's present direction. The contrast was stark. The crown presents permanence, unity, unshakable tradition, yet beneath it lay revisions, omissions, calculated silence, success built on suffering kept out of sight. Catherine now stood at the intersection of those two realities, aware that truth, once acknowledged, cannot easily be resealed. But the most shocking revelation wasn't about the past, it was about how the secret connects directly to the present. As the pieces finally came together, Catherine reportedly froze, because what she uncovered wasn't just a hidden chapter, it was a complete rewrite of royal history, a truth so profound, so destabilizing, that revealing it could shake the monarchy to its core. And in that moment, Catherine faced an impossible choice: protect the institution or expose the truth. The final documents, carefully concealed within that unmarked case and cross-referenced against the altered files, pointed to a single staggering conclusion. A pivotal moment in the line of succession had not unfolded as the public believed. A decision presented decades ago as orderly and inevitable had, in reality, been engineered under extraordinary pressure. Correspondence revealed negotiations behind closed doors, subtle coercion masked as counsel, and a reshuffling of royal standing designed to prevent a fracture that might have divided the nation. The official version spoke of unity. The private record told a story of containment. At the heart of it was legitimacy, not in the legal sense alone, but in the moral one. The crown had survived by recalibrating its own narrative, ensuring continuity at the cost of transparency. A senior royal figure, once closer to the center of power than history now admits, had been quietly sidelined after raising concerns about internal decisions that threatened to surface publicly. Their withdrawal had been framed as personal preference. In truth, the letters suggested it was the price of stability, and in the wake of that removal, the current structure of authority, solidified, presented to the world as seamless and unchallenged. For Catherine, the implications were immediate and deeply personal. The monarchy she had married into, its ceremonies, its vows, its promises of enduring lineage, rested upon foundations more fragile than anyone outside those walls could imagine. If legitimacy had once been negotiated in private, what did that mean for the identity of those now standing at its forefront? For her husband, for her children, the discovery did not merely question the past, it cast a shadow over the future. Shock gave way to something heavier: moral conflict. She understood why such measures might have been taken. A divided crown in a volatile era could have triggered national upheaval, but understanding did not erase discomfort. The monarchy's strength has always depended on public faith, and faith, once cracked, does not easily mend. If this truth surfaced, it could ignite debates about succession, reopen wounds thought long healed, and embolden critics who argue that the institution survives through opacity rather than service. Already, the pressure to remain silent felt almost tangible. Subtle reminders of loyalty, carefully phrased counsel about long-term stability, the unspoken understanding that some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. Within the family itself, loyalties would not be uniform. Some would insist the past remain untouched. Others, perhaps quietly burdened by what they too suspected, might see revelation as liberation. The unity the monarchy projects to the world could fracture under the weight of divided conscience. And yet, the discovery changed everything. Catherine was no longer merely a figurehead of continuity. She was a custodian of truth. The contrast between the crown's brilliance and the suffering buried beneath it had never felt sharper. To protect the institution might mean perpetuating a carefully crafted illusion. To expose the truth could redefine it entirely. And as Catherine left the vault, she knew one thing: the secret wouldn't stay buried forever. The vault is closed once again, the doors sealed, the silence restored, but something has changed. Catherine now carries a truth that could redefine the monarchy, and the world is beginning to notice. Subtle shifts, unspoken tension. The question is no longer what was found, but when it will be revealed. And when it is, nothing will ever be the same. In the weeks that followed, Catherine's public composure remained flawless. Appearances were met with grace, speeches delivered with calm precision, smiles offered exactly when expected. Yet those who have observed the monarchy closely for years began to sense a difference: not dramatic, not reckless, but measured. A pause before certain answers, a guarded tone when referencing legacy, a sharper awareness in her gaze when questions drifted toward succession, tradition, or the burdens of history. She had always understood the weight of the crown. Now she understood its cost. Behind palace walls, the atmosphere reportedly tightened. Meetings once routine became longer, more deliberate. Advisors who rarely intersected found themselves in quiet consultation. Language shifted subtly from confidence to caution. No one spoke openly of the vault, yet the ripple of its reopening lingered in every strategic discussion, because in institutions built on continuity, even the suggestion of concealed instability can feel like a fault line beneath marble floors. Insiders have hinted at growing divisions, not explosive arguments, but philosophical fractures. Some believe the monarchy's survival has always depended on untrolled narrative, that history must sometimes be shaped to protect national unity. Others argue that modern legitimacy requires transparency, that faith cannot endure if it is anchored in omission. Catherine stands at the center of that debate, not as a spectator, but as its silent catalyst. Her knowledge is not rumor, it is documented, it is tangible, and it is heavy. Speculation beyond palace gates has begun to swell. Commentators note subtle recalibrations in messaging. Historians revisit past events with renewed scrutiny. Long-forgotten names resurface in discussions once considered, settled. The public may not know the full story, but instinct tells them something has shifted. The monarchy projects stability, yet there is an undercurrent of anticipation, as if the institution itself is holding its breath. For Catherine, the burden is deeply personal. Every engagement, every ceremonial appearance now carries dual meaning. She is both guardian of tradition and witness to its concealed fractures. To speak would ignite upheaval. To remain silent is to protect a version of history she knows is incomplete. That tension follows her relentlessly, threading through moments of triumph and quiet reflection alike. Success on the world stage contrasts sharply with the private awareness of sacrifice and suppression that shaped that success. The future remains unwritten. Secrets of this magnitude do not disappear. They linger, pressing against the boundaries of silence. Perhaps the truth will surface through official channels, reframed once more for public acceptance. Perhaps it will leak in fragments, impossible to contain. Or perhaps it will remain guarded until another generation dares to ask the questions Catherine could not ignore, because in the shadows of Kensington Palace, the truth still waits, and it may only be a matter of time before it finally comes to light. Dan, K's for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.